Is this working now? Can you hear me? Can we turn up? Okay. We're about to get started, so can you all take your seats? We've opened it up so that there are more seats now in the back, so I hope everybody can find a place to sit down. The only danger is if you're seated, they're more likely to fall asleep than if you're standing. So.
Not necessarily.
That's why we have coffee. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll wait a second. He's adjusting the speaker. Okay, this panel this morning has the topic 2 hours in someone else's shoes, which is another way to say this is another panel about empathy, which has become a word I never actually used till about 3 or 4 years ago when we did a panel at the Cannes Film Festival on empathy at the American Pavilion. We have a number of filmmakers on our panel this morning, and 3 critics. Put the critics on the far end, where they belong. No, that's. I'll just do a short introduction. If you're on the panel and dissatisfied with what I've said about you, because it's going to be really short, feel free to amplify and create more empathy for yourselves. I'll just go down real quick. We have Tanya Wexler, whose film Hysteria you will see at this festival. Hugh Dancy is not sitting next to you. Charles Burnett is sitting next to you. His film To Sleep with Anger we're going to be screening this afternoon. Now we have Hugh Dancy, who is a star of his... We forgot Michael Hausman. No problem.
I feel your pain, dude.
Yeah. It has to do with typing up the list and putting the things in. You know what I'm trying to say. Michael Hausman you met last night. He was instrumental in the making of Hair. Now we have Hugh Dancy, who stars in Tanya's film. And then our Sheila, Richard, and Michael. They're the critics.
We don't even deserve last names.
And you all know who I am. I'd like to start asking the filmmakers. I mean, we've been talking a lot about how you empathize with people or situations or characters in motion pictures, but you guys make those motion pictures. How do you create that verisimilitude? How do you create stories, characters that are believable enough for us to fully empathize with? And we'll start with Tanya.
That's a very good question. I think it is a lot of kind of what we try to, it's most of the project of what we try to do. I loved what Chaz said yesterday, that Roger always said, that movies are machines. What do you say, machines for building empathy or creating empathy? Generating empathy, because I think that is so much what we try to do, live in another experience. A lot of it is hiring fantastic actors. It's funny, there's an old saying which is, you can make a bad movie out of a good script, but you rarely can make a good movie out of a bad script. Did I say that right? And but it's funny because you can take a script that's well wrought, but maybe flat on the page, and you put a real human being in that role, a living, breathing human being with feelings. And sometimes all you have to do is point the camera at a fantastic actor, and all of a sudden you're in. And so a huge amount is in the casting. I think there's the world building aspect, the design, and how stylized or how naturalistic. That's really based on your personal style and the dictates of the script. But if you hire those people and do that job well, then it really is down to putting those incredible actors and putting them in, you know, difficult emotional situations and watching them shine.
Charles?
Yes. I started off in film by wanting to, to make films that sort of change how people view people of color. I'm sorry. I see your hands. Okay. I started off by wanting to make films that gave an alternative view of people of color. And, most of the films you see, at least when I saw when I was a kid, never portrayed people of color in an accurate light. And I knew the people I grew up with were totally different from what you saw on screen. And so it was, over the years, it kept reinforcing that you have to do something, you have to do something. When I was in high school, for example, and junior high, I remember leaving the school that was really bad in many ways. It pretended to teach you, but it really wasn't what they really wanted to do. So anyway, I remember walking back and I said, well, someday I'm going to write about this, to do something about this, And years later, I forgot about it. Then when I got into film school, one of the things I wanted to do was to talk about, the kind of, the things that we confront, the issues that we confront, the things that destroy us, And it automatically, you sort of deal with empathy. There's no way around it, And I've always looked at it, I don't want to go on too long, but I always sort of looked at it as sort of ambivalent about the whole issue, because sometimes, for example, I was in a class where they asked us to volunteer to do this humanitarian work, like going to the Veterans Hospital in this terminal ward to deal with people who are dying, vets. And so I really volunteered. And when I got there, I found it wasn't something I really could do, in a sense, because it was really demanding. And you find people, for example, there was a vet who was a war veteran in World War II, and he had killed a lot of people. And at first, I didn't know he had did all those things, but he was a Medal of Honor. And he started telling me about these stories, and then my whole attitude for him changed. I wasn't so empathetic with him, and it was kind of like trying to work my way back into him. But it's not an easy thing to do, to say I want to do this. Something that you have to work at. And the characters in my film that I like to do is to make them sort of ambiguous in a way, where they're, it's up to you to decide if they're to sort of empathize with them in a certain sense, at least the bad guys, if that makes any sense.
It does. It makes sense. Michael, why don't you talk a little, one of the things we were talking about last night is Milos Forman's use of real people in his movies whenever he possibly could, and the use of faces and the use of and how crowds are employed to create a sense of verisimilitude. Can you talk a little bit about how that process works?
Well, this is not to diminish the role of real actors. However, I remember once making a movie called No Mercy with Richard Gere, who played a police officer. And I arranged for him to go with the Chicago police out on drug raids. And on one occasion, they were in a building and they were catching some drug dealers, and one of the guys that they found said, "Hey, wait a minute, isn't that Richard Gere?" We still put him in the paddy wagon, and he went away. So my job is a little different than the director's. My job is to make the actor feel comfortable in the situation. But also, I do wear a wristwatch, and sometimes actors have their own schedules, and it's a producer's job to make sure that they're there on my schedule. But I've had actors out with tape measures figuring, that their camper was smaller than the other star's camper. Now, that wouldn't be you, of course, but because in your movie you probably didn't get a camper.
Not so much.
But anyhow, actors, there are two things.
Don't rub it in, though.
Make a movie with me, I'll get you a camper. But,
I would be happy to work on that. That would be fine.
My job is to make actors comfortable. There are two really important things in movies. The most important thing is what's the movie about, and then the actors are the next thing, because they're the people that are going to keep you in the movie or take you out of the movie. If the movie's successful, it's the actor's job to make it believable. So my job is to make them comfortable, and I try and do that as much as I can.
Hugh, did Michael make you comfortable just now?
Well, I've learned that empathy is a result of scheduling and a camper. I'm going to carry that with me. I'll quote you.
See, I did a little bit of casting here. I put you two guys next to each other.
Well, I think from my perspective, empathy is the result of, or providing a character that other people can empathize with, is the result of specificity. And you have to do a lot of actual brain work. You don't just sit there and feel your way into it. I think you have to really take yourself through step by step what's going on here with this script, with a blueprint, trying to, as it were, read between the lines and build a structure for yourself, an internal structure, until you understand how this person works, perhaps even independent of the script that you've been given. And once you've built that for yourself, and you then also have fully immerse yourself in the script. And I know this sounds silly, but really learnt your lines well. Actually, that's kind of an important point. I mean, getting past the way we film quickly, and it's very easy to kind of get today's stuff in, and then you're done with that and move on to tomorrow's. And I think it's hard to move past all the work you've done, assuming you've done that work, to spontaneity and the thing that people will just connect to on the screen, unless the lines have been pushed so far into the back of your brain that you're not thinking about them at all. But essentially that internal structure and the detail of the work that you've done will hopefully provide something big enough and real enough for an audience to connect to it.
Can you, here's a question to think about. I assume, because you're British, you've done some stage work.
So much. No, I have.
Okay. The difference between projecting this, what you're talking about in the character on the stage versus in front of the camera. But
Yeah.
I think we'll come back to that. We'll go down to just a little homework so you can do that brain work you were just talking about. Sheila, why don't you take off your critic hat and put on your writer hat, because Sheila has a short film that we're showing in the festival this year. Can you talk about that creative process?
That came out of, I kind of wrote it on impulse. I was, like the first line came to me, I was like, oh, I wonder what someone would say next to that, and that's how basically I discovered it. It's part of a full length, but we just shot a scene. So it was very interesting having to, as we started coming to filming, letting go of what I envisioned, and letting the director, I was very clear when we had our first meetings about what I wanted, and it's a short film, so I was like, I might as well have my dreams come true with a 12-minute, for now, and now I'm not going to compromise first, and but we were all on the same page on the energies we wanted. They aren't character parts. We just needed people who could listen and talk and really be with each other, and who weren't acting, who could just had the right essence already. But I had to once I had said my piece, I was like, okay, you guys, let's see what happens. And they were amazing. The actors were amazing. I mean, one of the ways that I even got into writing about film was my kind of passion for acting. And sometimes it's difficult for me to watch a film and remove my either identification with the acting or my interest in the acting. And sometimes I don't want to remove it. So I'm very interested in how actors enter roles. Speaking about the ambiguity that you were just speaking about, Charles, about how do actors either empathize with, is it necessary for actors to empathize with their characters in order to play them? And there's many different people have many different, like Tommy Lee Jones said once, no, I don't have to like the guy, you just have to want to watch him, which is kind of interesting. So I'm very interested in that process for actors. I'd love to hear what Hugh has to say about that too.
So many questions are stacking.
Keep it your list.
Well, that's why you're at the center. Well, Richard and Michael, I'll let you guys talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Oh, good. I want to talk about the zucchini movie that Carlos mentioned at the previous panel. I would just say, and especially building on that, the whole notion of process, I work on animation, French cinema, all kinds of stuff, but I'm also really interested in what we do when we watch movies in terms of cognition, perception, empathy machines. Certainly all movies that are any good are. I also work on movie trailers, which are like little empathy machines on, turbo-driven. And we actually put people in MRIs at University of Georgia and are watching their brains while they watch movie trailers to see at what point do you become more engaged, less engaged? What, is there anything formal that a director could do? Does it have to do with whether they liked the actor before they got in the MRI or not? And those sorts of things. So the process, but the whole notion of writers trying to think, well, when and how should we build empathy? Shouldn't just be one flat thing all the way through a movie either. It gets pretty boring. If you say, oh, I like that person, I feel sorry for that one, when you can walk out after 10 minutes. It's usually a really complicated kind of process. So I'm interested in how writers try to set up the primacy effect, that you're going to like somebody or not like them at the beginning and then change that as they go. Very interested in how the lighting and the cinematographers, they really care about who you care about at what moment in the film. And that's why I think versus literature, versus other art forms, media, film in particular, with soundtracks and the acting and the directing, it's just a lot of different ways to engage with characters, make them more or less compelling. But you're right, it has to have a story worth telling, and who cares? But ambiguity is terrific. So just being able to empathize with characters, is one thing a movie can do. But make us, think about human beings and how we relate to them is really what we do when we watch movies, I guess.
The commercial dictates of cinema, I would think, push every new project in the direction of sympathy, not empathy. It's easier, it's clearer for the audience, and it makes more money. My joy as a critic is discovering all the movies and even just the moments within movies where you transcend cheap sympathy and get into something like profound empathy, where you don't really know why you're feeling what you're feeling until you think and feel your way through it. And that's what I love. And any director, any screenwriter, any actor, I think, that's aspiring to something is going for that higher grade of empathy. The Hanukkah film Amor came up in the previous panel, and that's a film and that's a filmmaker certainly that a lot of people feel is ice cold and and everybody, when the reviews came out on Amor, it was like, oh, he's really warmed up this time. But I thought, well, that's a stupid way to look at it. But it's but there's something in the temperature of that film compared to Hanukkah's other films that is yes, and it made money in the U.S., which is kind of remarkable in itself. But it's that. The wonderful thing about it, just this concept of empathy for what we all do individually and often at odds with each other, is that it can mean any temperature of a moment. It can mean you don't have to like what's going on. You just have to be, I think you're right, you have to be interested, and you have to be provoked into a complicated reaction. And then we can feel like we're sharing time, valuable time, whether we thought we wanted to go there or not.
filmmakers, do you consider yourself provocateurs?
In life? Yes. It's funny, I think Michael, this one's always right, but particularly this one, I think you're right. It's funny, I hadn't thought about it in terms of course, it's easier to kind of want to like your protagonist or, be sympathetic to, rather than feel like, or feel as if, and I was just reflecting on Hysteria, which is, made this kind of feminist film with like the lead being, kind of a white dude who plays, a fairly privileged, right, like a doctor in Victorian England, but his journey is really from a kind of sympathetic to empathetic character. So he kind of takes along, if you will, this kind of privileged point of view, and has really the veil lifted from his eyes in a really funny way. And obviously comedy and humor is a way to pull you in another way. So I thought that just kind of gave me a light bulb. But I wanted to loop back to something that was said before, is kind of Hugh and Sheila together, which is back to process, which is, I don't know about being a provocateur. It's for me, I feel like it's more the way I like to direct, largely, is to set up the world, to get the perfect design and the sets and the lighting and everything to be so kind of undeniable that by the time the actors arrive, it gives them the freedom to make present organic choices. Yes, they still have to, for the most part, say the lines as written, but a lot of what you do, so even right before the actors would arrive on set, might go, let's move that chair over there, or, let's someone plop a bag down in that chair so they don't go sit in it. Sorry about that.
We're like gerbils.
Yes. But within that, and so it's kind of, it's funny, you get into these things a bit on set, and actors, are real people, despite what some people might say. But I think there's great, right, like Haskell came from a real tradition. My uncle was Haskell Wexler, and he was really interested in verite and kind of real people as actors, and I think that's great. But in the end, I'm just interested in whatever tells this specific story the best. But a really great actor is like a homing beacon for something that isn't true. So you will get everything right. You will get every bit of costuming and hair and set, and then they will walk in and they'll go, these banknotes really look terrible, and you're sitting there going, did you see all this stuff we got around here? But of course they did, but they know, it's maddening, but it's this kind of great final check on that. And without that sense of, as you said, verisimilitude, I think the audience is out. They're out, and then you can't do anything. So I don't know why I'm saying all this, but
You're being a provocateur.
I'm being a provocateur. No, but I don't know. I think that maybe if it's a provocateur to kind of start to try and tell stories that are out of the kind of basic core narrative, cultural narrative, then yes. But I'm not really interested in provoking reaction for any old reason. I'm much more interested in telling stories that are meaningful to me. And I think there's been a couple of dominant narratives for a long time. And you can have very entertaining, very kind of mainstream narratives that aren't always the dominant narrative. And I think that's more interesting to me than just poking the bear.
So you want to subvert the dominant narrative.
What he said, yes.
Okay. Charles, you want to talk about some of this stuff?
Well, for me, I'm sorry, I'm speaking right into it. I'm sorry. For me, film has to say something. It has to move people. It's such an expensive proposition. You're spending like thousands of dollars to millions and millions of dollars on a film, and that money can go to some place where you can actually do some actually good, like feeding the poor and stuff like that. And so for me, it has to be something that I can justify saying that, okay, this will serve the community or something or another. And one of the good things, I had people who come up and say, your film changed my life and did this. And that makes it worthwhile. And and for me, you make films that change people's behavior, and I'm not going to be preacher didactic or anything like that, but I mean, it's, that's what it's worth to me, is to make a film that can change people's lives and things like that, without being pretentious, but that's how I came to film.
And you succeeded in doing that. Michael?
Can I just say one thing? We were talking about Killer of Sheep yesterday, and that's a film I saw at a young age in sort of a semi-authorized screening before the rights got worked out. If you haven't seen Charles's Killer of Sheep, that's a film I barely had the resources to respond to when I first saw it, and it's really meant, movies like Moonlight are unthinkable without it, and all kind of, it's a beautiful, it's a key work of the 1970s.
As is To Sleep with Anger, which we're showing at the festival this year. Michael Hausman.
Well, that's a big word, provocateur. Does that mean troublemaker?
Yes.
Well, then, yeah, I can qualify for that. I sort of look at my role a little bit like Jimmy Cricket in Pinocchio. I like to whisper into people's ears, is that really what you wanted to say or what you really wanted? And then, of course, it's up to them to say, yes, it is, and then I go away. And, of course, at the end, they were wrong. But anyhow, it's a producer's role is a little bit different. It's the eyes and ears of the audience. Usually you're the first one on and the last one off. Everyone else has gone away and everyone else takes credit for it. But that's okay too. I just like to watch what's going on and help to get the picture made. Sometimes to make the picture better, you have to get your face in their face, nicely as much as possible, and especially since it's the motion picture business today, and if you don't make money or if you don't make a movie for what you say you're going to make it for, you don't get to make the next one. So the important thing is to help the movie get made, and sometimes it's necessary to just be a little bit of a sandpaper to make the movie better. So I don't mind providing that role. It's kind of fun, actually.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting. We have directors, we have a producer, and we're back to our actor, who seems to be being picked upon a little bit here. So if you want to come to the defense of your profession, we'd be happy to.
Don't put me in that role. Yeah, I don't know what the panel would have been like without an actor on it. No,
boring,
I think that anything interesting has to provoke, right? It doesn't mean to say that you set out as that as your dominant goal, but if you're not provoking something, some surprise or discomfort or whatever it might be, then you just, on a very basic level of trying to entertain, you're not doing a great job. Thinking about Hysteria, for example, well, because we're showing it, that was not the kind of film where it particularly made sense to try and delve into this guy, for me anyway, delve into the absolute inner workings of this guy's life. The way it was going to progress, as Tanya described, was kind of clear that in a way the scales were going to be lifted from his eyes. And there were a lot of different things happening in the movie, different tones, and I felt that my job there was to try and, to some extent, reconcile them and again, make it interesting to watch, which is a tough thing because you're trying to kind of join everything at the seams without being bland. But there, for example, a character who ultimately, it's pretty clear, has to have an element of charm, even when he's wrong-headed. I thought was going to be, I tried to kind of argue in the script and when we're shooting the scenes in some of the romantic moments, basically for him to be a bit more of a bit less likable. and a bit more just kind of aggressive. I think that's most how good romantic comedies work, actually. But and then by the same token, playing, as I have been recently on the TV show that I'm working on, somebody who's really does some fairly heinous things. The provocative thing, obviously, is to try and find ways that an audience might not be able to resist liking him or feeling for him. So I mean, I think I'm in some way echoing what Michael said, which is that if you set out to be liked for its own sake, you're on a losing. Actually, I think everybody kind of said this to some extent. You're on a losing streak. You have to. You have to, again, you have to build the interior strongly enough that you don't second guess whatever your responses might be in the moment when you're filming a scene, and trust that those responses, even if they're not obvious, or in fact, even if hopefully they are ambiguous, will just stand up because of the interior logic, and that will draw people in. And then going back to your question about theatre and film, that's just a difference in technique, I think. I mean, you don't, in the theatre, sit back and hope that people will come to you, because that's a disastrous approach. But the work that goes into creating it and to making your decisions along the way is pretty much the same.
Is subtlety easier in film than it is on the stage?
No, I don't think so. I mean, subtlety means different things. I mean, subtlety in film sometimes means doing less when it's a close-up, and expecting or understanding that the audience will project onto you to some degree. And subtlety in the theatre might just mean like not jiggling your hand around because people can see it all the time, So no, I think I mean, again, that's technique. I think that subtlety of thought and approach is exactly the same.
Okay. Sheila, what do you think about that?
Am I I'm not a provocateur.
Well, we know you're not. We've moved beyond provocateurism.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if we were.
We're moving on to subtlety and the creation of character. And in the writing of your screenplay, how much did you leave out? How much did you leave to the audience to
well, a lot. I
into
mean,
your
it's
screenplay?
two people talking. So, and it's the aftermath of some kind of very, short situation that neither of them even can say they were dating. They're like, we weren't dating. They can't agree. I wanted definitely her to be, a difficult woman a little bit, not a kind of soft. It's been very interesting seeing reactions to her, especially when we've done full-length readings. We did one in New York, and she gets more and more kind of complicated, and there have been times when the women in the audience are kind of automatically, oh, I'm seeing this from her point of view, and at some point the women kind of turn on her, or feel like, oh God, she's ruining this, and suddenly everyone's on the guy's side. There's a gender swap, and all the men, not all of them, but it's been fascinating. A lot of men come up to me after we do readings, and I'm saying this not as a criticism, I'm saying this as it's kind of beautiful, is the men come up to me and kind of tell me about themselves and say, I remember that girl that I dated, who I can't. And it's a male, I love that there's this kind of this, I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting it to be. Anyway, speaking about sort of rom-coms and, sometimes that's a genre that I love. I love screwball comedies going back, and the sort of we hate each other, but God, this woman, I must chase her with a butterfly net, and, and, I adore that vibe, and it kind of, maybe because of gender roles have changed, and it's very difficult to kind of get that now, but I still think it's very pleasing. I mean, I would love to be chased by Cary Grant with a butterfly net, So I think
Well,
that's
can
gonna
either of
be
you
my
guys at the
quote
end
on
of the
my
table
epitaph.
rescue her from the...
She doesn't need any rescuing. She's doing great. Yeah, I mean, I think what I mean, if we're on rom-coms, here's what makes me nuts about most rom-coms, especially of the last 20 years. Look, everything has a chance to go wrong with the movie long before the actors get to the set. Everything, every decision, and every word in the script they may be rewriting on the fly on the set. But the simple frustration I have with a lot of rom-coms is just that they make the decisions too damn easy for the audience. It's like, okay, well, there's a false rival here and a human obstacle there, and we'll just make them ridiculous, pathetic, embarrassing, or dislikable enough to just, have the audience mentally all going, ding, get them out of the way so we can get to the end. It's not much of a movie, I mean, yes, in His Girl Friday, Ralph Bellamy is clearly not worthy of Rosalind Russell's Rosalind Russell, and Cary Grant is, but there's such wit and sort of surprise and just juice in the way that plays out. I mean, you look at the first 15 minutes of His Girl Friday, and that's great classical Hollywood filmmaking, and anyway, to drag it around to empathy, I think what that means is, don't just if a movie can at least make an attempt to complicate our sympathies, then we can get to empathy. Do you know what I mean? That's what I think.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're talking about is something Roger said that he wanted in every movie he saw, and that was to be surprised, to something unexpected to happen, because he knew what to expect. And I think you're talking about the classic 3-act structure, and we know what's going to happen in each.
And it can happen, and then I'll shut up. It can happen in 5 seconds of nonverbal action. I mean, I don't know who said it, or I'm going to revise this as I go, but somebody once said that the best use of a close-up in silent film, but you could say it for any kind of film, is a character changing their mind. Not just one emotion, one thought, one stupid reaction shot, but like somebody changing their mind, and then it happens in a way that the audience enters it and does some of the completes it. Oh, instead of just
Yeah. Let's throw it open to some questions from the audience. We have a microphone here, so if you. I remember you from last year.
Yeah, I remember you too.
I remember it was a long question.
I guess my question's for more for Mr. Burnett and Mr. Hausman. I'm from New York, and my former Senator Moynihan made that infamous study in 1965 about the lives of black folks, and he got a lot of flack from that from other fellow left-wingers, even though I think he really didn't say anything different from what W.E.B. Du Bois said about 65 years before that. And when I saw Hair yesterday, I guess the Ebertfest panel are about the Ebert Fellows are about the same age as the characters in Hair, who are now in their 70s, and I kind of figured after seeing the screening that those folks kind of won in the terms of popular culture, and yet, if you lose 6 out of the last 7 popular votes, I would suggest you don't represent the ideas of the American people. There's always some kind of disconnect at a political level, even though I think in many cases on the ground, in terms of popular culture, those folks won. And is there any way, or is there any examples in cinema or art in general where maybe not a provocateur, but an artist could be as much of a provocateur as the person that got their way into the White House, because 400 years ago, we're still lining around the corner to see artists of the Renaissance, and I have no doubt that people do the same for Killer of Sheep and Hair and whatnot. But is there any way that those ideas and that empathy, I related to Moonlight very much, even though I'm not gay, I'm not black, I'm not from Florida. But I have a feeling that that's someone preaching to the choir, because I already am open to that.
What's the question?
What? he warned you. He warned you. Do you think that there's a way, as filmmakers, or there are examples of filmmakers, as opposed to, say, like Michael Moore, who isn't making narrative fiction, where you can actually have that impact? I don't like to say provocateur, because you set anything on fire, people are going to look, but as filmmakers, that you can kind of wedge or meld together that disconnect between what I think films like Hair and whatnot represent the progress of popular culture, where there's still a disconnect with the politics that drive a generation.
I think we got it. You go, what's the answer?
What's the answer?
Can you change the political consciousness of society with your films? Charles?
Well, you hope to, in a certain extent, yes. I mean, you've seen examples of, I can't mention offhand, but you've seen what documentaries have done and changed, people's awareness and changed the outcome of certain convictions and things like that. So documentaries certainly can, and fictional films as well, and I think that's one of the power of film, is that you can change society. I mean, when you look at third world cinema and things like that, you can certainly find it there, where films have led to political change in society, or at least supported, exterior change. Like, for example, like one of the important influences in art filmmaking development was watching, political films, third world films, and that changed our whole attitude about what films can do. So, yes, that's the answer to you.
Michael?
I'd love to jump in on this one, too.
Okay.
Is that okay? I'll wait till Michael goes.
No, you jump in first.
All right. Absolutely. I think, yes, you can do it. Maybe one film or one TV show, it can have a cultural impact. But I think it's through persistent shift in representation.
Yes, yes.
I mean, much to why you got into film. And that means changing the makeup, not exclusively, but of the filmmakers and authors as well. There's just so... Right, 1 in 4 lines in a movie is said by a woman right now, and that's ridiculous. And they know that by having more female directors, more female writers, more female producers, that shifts. So my spouse is a woman, and we have 4 kids, and when I got out of undergraduate and went to film school, I couldn't get married. I couldn't visit her in the emergency room if she was, had a heart attack. I mean, all of that. And how has that shifted? Okay, so that has shifted somewhat through political action, but a lot of it shifted because Ellen had a talk show. You invite people into your home, into the cultural church that is the cinema, where we share lines and experiences, again, this empathy machine, and that's what shifts people's hearts and minds. And you can't do it with one piece. You do it by bringing kind of impact of, representation, frame after frame after frame. So I have no doubt. I mean, it is the thing where I go, as I said, I love Hugh, and I love watching the scales be lifted from this guy's eyes, but I sometimes kick myself and say I made a feminist movie with a dude at the center. But and yet,
But
that's
he's
important too. It's not.
He's a sensitive dude.
He is. He's an amazing dude. But it's
Just acting.
It's just acting. He's not actually a dude. But on the point is not, of course, to vilify or create a new other, right? I have a son. He's not the bad guy. I love him. The point is to bring people in, to empathize, across, representation. But the only way you can do that is to consistently change what we see, what we understand as people who are people rather than symbols.
Yeah,
so that's my answer.
A friend of mine wrote his dissertation on the impact HBO had on changing attitudes toward the gay community, because for the past 10, 15, 20 years, HBO has consistently done various dramatic and documentary films on the subject. And when you add that to Ellen, and you add that to Will and Grace and the other, yeah, and it's had a complete and total impact on attitudes in this country. Michael, you were going to say something. I know you weren't, but I want you to say something. Can you talk about Hair as a political film?
Well, I think, seeing it again last night, all you have to do is look at the newspapers today and find it's still a relevant movie. It's up to everybody here in this room to make sure that we don't make some of the mistakes we made then, now we know where the aircraft carrier is. Hopefully it stays in Australia and the sailors have a good time.
Yeah, the R&R in North Korea is not to be envied, right? Other questions from the audience? Where's our line of people with questions? We have time for
absolutely.
3 questions, because we have 3 people standing up. 4.
Sorry. Sorry. Hi everyone. I'm Kohn from the Wheelchair Watcher. I basically said something at the panel every year. This time I actually have a good question. This is one for the entire panel. What film or television show in your lives, whether you were younger or older, made you an empathetic observer?
Wow. That's a variation on what's your favorite film.
I mean, I have something in my mind. When I was babysitting when I was 12, and there was no cable. There was like a late night TV where you could watch old movies, and Dog Day Afternoon was playing. I also saw East of Eden the same year, which was also hugely impactful. But Dog Day Afternoon, I was way too young. A sex change. I didn't understand really the whole plot, like why he was robbing the bank. But Al Pacino's performance absolutely really changed. I feel like I kind of stopped being a child and became an aware human being. Political, I asked my dad what Attica was. Why was he screaming Attica in the street? I became aware of the world around me. So that was Dog Day Afternoon.
Anyone else?
I don't necessarily have one single choice, but one that kind of comes to mind. I don't want to repeat. Who would ever want to repeat a mistake that Sean Spicer made? but watching Downfall, watching that portrayal, like pretty fearless portrayal of Adolf Hitler in that extreme scenario, and doing it without, falling victim to the need to any more than is obvious to portray him as a monster, and just it was that clear-eyed portrayal I thought was pretty striking.
Anyone else?
Well, I'll just say something that for teaching especially, and it kind of goes back to Eric's question from before, Children of Paradise, Children of Heaven, not Children of Heaven, an Iranian movie, which works for students a lot, who just think of Iran as someplace that might get bombed, and then suddenly goes back to the children or the shoe notion, but it's about these 2 little kids who have to share a pair of shoes. And by the end of the class, the students are all going, "Run, Ali, run!" And it's like a really good little machine for that. But just to watch students build empathy for somebody they would never have thought about and things like that. So yeah, Children of Heaven is a good example, I think.
Okay. Next question.
I'm an engineer. First, I'd like to welcome all of you. I want to thank you, panel, for being here to participate and to make my experience of Ebertfest, my first time, so much more enjoyable. And Hugh, My name is Lou, L-O-U, not L-O-O, and we rhyme. I love that. As I said, I'm an engineer, so I try to break things down very simply. And I'm trying to, the subject of this was empathy. And we came up with a little sympathy in there also. And there's two words that come to my mind: for, F-O-R, and like. If I feel for a person, that's sympathy. If I feel like a person, that's empathy. How do you define the difference? Is that too hard? I can make it easier question.
That's beautiful. That was
Yeah.
very thought-provoking.
Yeah, it's a very simple definition, but it's a true definition.
There's a psychological thing too that some people talk about, alignment, which is I understand why that person's being mean. I understand why they're doing what they're doing. And narrative and scriptwriters have to really make sure that everybody's in their shoes in terms of saying, oh, I get why the Terminator has to come back and kill that woman, etc. But then allegiance is when you finally say, I understand what they're doing, and I believe they've got right reasons to do so. So feeling allegiance leads to a sort of web of sympathy, this empathy, etc. So being aligned is one thing, I understand it, but then yeah, really empathizing means that you have a real allegiance with that person, to me at least.
But or you become that person.
I think in moments of real, I mean, what I would think of as kind of cinematic empathy, you feel transported, right? You're not necessarily processing it. I know that's not exactly what you're saying, but, oh, okay, I see why in your example, Terminator had to kill that woman. But you are taken out of yourself. I mean, that's the feeling of it. And you don't necessarily suddenly think, I am the character in that movie, but in an emotional sense, it makes sense to you, right? I think Moonlight is actually a fine example of that. I mean, I as the gentleman who asked the first question said, I don't fit any of those categories, but you're sucked into it, right? Quite know where I'm going with that. It's not quite either of those two words, but you are certainly taken, not even into someone else's shoes, but you're taken out of your own shoes for a second, and that's an incredibly valuable thing.
Yeah, we last year we in our trailers we ran a quote from Roger, who was quoting Pauline Kael, who said, she said, I take everything I am, everything I know, everything I've experienced into the movie theater with me. I watch the movie, I come out, and I see if anything has changed, right? And that's essentially what you're talking about. Yeah. Question.
I want to expand on what Michael Phillips said a few minutes ago. Back in 1916, believe it or not, a psychologist talked about that when you watch movies, there were several processes going on in the viewer. And two of them he talked about were memory and imagination. And it seems to me that most American directors don't give the viewer time to breathe in order to use their memory or imagination. And as Michael says, they tell you everything. They don't leave anything for your imagination. Most European directors, on the other hand, seem to leave you lots of time to breathe and think about it and use your own mind, figure out what's you want to be happening. They don't want to give you the answers. Like to hear your comments.
I don't want to get too academic, but this is an academic panel. If you look at Roland Barthes' theories of writerly versus readerly texts, or Marshall McLuhan's hot media versus cool media, we want films to invite us in to be part of the creative process. We don't want to be told everything and not allowed to enjoy what's the word I'm looking for? The unexpected that's going to happen to you when you're part of the process of creating an experience. But we won't go into that. We'll take the final question.
I got one thing to say about. I think it's interesting what you say. However, I was a big fan of Ingmar Bergman's earlier movies, and there was a scene where a doctor is going to see a patient who's dying, and he goes in the carriage, and it's sunny. He gets out of the carriage, and then he sees the patient, and he gets back in the carriage, and it's dark and it's raining, and someone asked him, well, how did you do that? It was brilliant. He said, well, when we went, it was sunny, and we left, it was raining.
I think sometimes empathy and likability can be confused in screenwriting, because I feel that some directors who have a tendency to be viewed as very cold, like a Kubrick or a Fincher or a Haneke or maybe even a Verhoeven, is that they're not, it's about character, but they're not trying to trick you in any way to feel for what's going on screen. They're just basically presenting the action and they're letting you fill it in. And I think that's why there's some people, even maybe to an extent Hitchcock, you know, he seems like it's very mechanical and it's not real, but they're just not necessarily using the camera tricks, you know, like push-ins or like sound effects to try to like almost like cheaply put you on the side of the character.
But I think that's to some extent rom-coms you're talking about. Romantic comedies became rom-coms somewhere along the line. And I think that's because a bunch of people who kind of are the gatekeepers and pay the checks saw a lot of romantic comedies and liked them and misunderstood why they liked them. You know, so they remembered like the fun and the thing, and they kind of boil that down. I mean, I don't mean to, you know, paint everybody with the same brush, but think, well, I think I liked those characters, so for God's sake, we've got to make them likable, you know, which is a total misreading. So, and the reason they want to do that is because they want the movie to make money. So, yeah, I think I'm just kind of going back to what you were saying earlier.
I'd love to just sort of say to Tanya the simple change that has to be made is going to be the most profound work of our lives, and that we can't get no transition in this culture, no transition in the industry, no transition without representation. So I want to take the old taxation thing, throw that out, just put in no transition without representation. And that includes critics, and I say that as a critic of pallor, not a critic of color.
On that profound note,
Hashtag, Michael, no transition without representation. It's a long hashtag.
so thank you all for getting up early and being a part of this. And thank you all for showing up. Remember, the first film is at 1 o'clock today in the Virginia Theater, which is only a short walk from here.
And tell them which film it is.
If I knew, I would. Hysteria, starring Hugh Dancy.